Hello, this is Tiffany, and I'm back here to talk to you all about Saturn return, but specifically about the second Saturn return. I've done a lot of content and a lot of speaking about human design. And in the past, I would say that I've always been an astrology enthusiast. I have read lots of books about it, but it wasn't until recently that I started actually doing coursework and actually get quote unquote certified. So, as a part of my process of getting actually a little stamp, what I did was I offered astrology readings at a really reduced cost so that I could get experience with friends, family, people on Facebook, my newsletter people, that sort of thing. And by the way, I really love doing these astrology and human design readings at a super reduced cost, and I'm going to continue to do it in the future. So if that is something you'd ever be interested in, hop over to my website and sign up for my newsletter because that's how you'll find out when I'm running that special. Or you can find the link below here in the notes. But I have really just found that those conversations have just been freaking amazing. The people have been amazing. It's just been this amazing thing. It's been an amazing experience. So, anyway, one of the things that I've really loved in doing human design readings, but also astrology readings, is when I'm doing readings for people who are across different age spans. It's been very interesting to do a reading, say, for somebody who's 18, 19, or in their early 20s versus somebody who's in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And recently, I had somebody come back to me. So she had gotten human design reading from me and said, "Hey, I'd love to have astrology conversation with you." And one of the things that I love doing when I'm having readings with people too is I like to really understand and get a sense for how their lived experience is. How do these things, placements, activations, energy types, how do these gates, channels, planets, whatever it is, how do they show up for people in their life? What is the practical manifestation of these things? And so, something I'm very interested in is the second Saturn return. And I'll just explain it for people who are not aware. In theory, from an astrology perspective, around the age of 30 ish, we all go through Saturn return. So that means that Saturn, wherever it's placed in your chart natally at the time you were born, it's revolving and it comes back to the same position where it was when you were born. And because Saturn is the great teacher, it is here to teach something to us. And it can mark a difficult time, it can mark a challenging time, it can mark a coming of age situation. So it can get really interesting, especially if you look at where your Saturn is placed and how does that show up in your life. So this is around the age of 30. But Saturn, if we're lucky to live long enough, will come back around because it's constantly moving in our late 50s to early 60s. And so I'm turning 50 this year, so I can expect mine in about 10 years. And I'm starting to get really curious. What does that look like? What is the difference between a Saturn return when you're in your 30s versus a Saturn return when you're around 60? So for me, my Saturn return was quite challenging. It was marked by divorce. It was marked by a lot of really tough times from a career perspective. My Saturn is actually placed in my career house. And so I'm like, well, what do I have to expect here in 10 years? So I was lucky enough to have somebody come back and say, hey, let's have an astrology conversation. And so we set up time. And this woman is in her late 60s. And I asked her, you've been through your Saturn return. I'm very curious. How did that go for you? What was that experience like? Did you know you were going through it when it happened? Because she is very in tune with astrology. And I'm not going to quote her because I can't. But the message that I got from her was, it's interesting because that time was definitely marked by some specific challenges that came up in my life. but I had the tools at that point to navigate them. And so these are my words, not her words, but it sounded like that second Saturn return, at least in her case, was a bit gentler because of all her lived experiences. Now, there may have been something else going on in her chart that played into that as well, but it was very encouraging to me because I don't want Saturn returns to become a scary thing. I feel like the more we are aware of what's going on with these different energies, that we can lean into them and leverage them as opportunities. We can alchemize them in powerful and positive ways. And so it was really encouraging for me to hear her talk about how it just ended up being kind of this more gentle, challenging situation that wasn't this big earth-shattering thing that I had experienced when I was in my 30s. And again, I'm not being prescriptive. I'm not trying to say that we'll all have such a gentle experience, but I just wanted to share that because I think it's always useful to hear what other people have experienced when it comes to these sorts of things. All right, so that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions for me, let me know.